A dimly lit basement in suburban Boston, 1975. The hum of custom-built equipment fills the air as an MIT graduate hunches over a mixing board he designed himself. Empty coffee cups litter the workspace, and the clock reads 3 a.m. This isn't your typical recording studio, and Tom Scholz isn't your typical rock star. What happened in this basement would completely transform the music industry and create one of the most legendary debut albums in rock history. But the path to this moment, it's even more fascinating than the music itself. While other aspiring musicians were playing dive bars and begging for record deals, Tom Scholz was doing complex calculations at his day job. His story starts in a place you'd never expect to find a rock legend, the research and development department at Polaroid Corporation. The same company that was revolutionizing photography had unknowingly hired someone who would revolutionize rock music. His co-workers had no idea that the quiet, brilliant man in their office was secretly crafting what would become Boston's groundbreaking first album. The contrast couldn't have been more striking. During the day, Scholz designed precision equipment for instant cameras, his MIT degree hanging proudly on his office wall, but as soon as the sun set, he'd transform into something else entirely. That same analytical mind that solved complex engineering problems would spend countless nights obsessing over guitar tones and sonic textures that had never been heard before. Born into a middle-class family in Toledo, Ohio, Scholz's early life gave no hints of his future in rock stardom. His mother was a teacher who insisted he learn classical piano, laying the foundation for his musical understanding. But it was his father's background as a mechanical engineer that perhaps had the most profound influence. Young Tom grew up taking things apart, figuring out how they worked, and putting them back together, usually with improvements. The turning point came when he first heard the revolutionary sounds of bands like Led Zeppelin and the Jeff Beck Group. Scholz was captivated, but not just by the music. His engineer's mind was fascinated by how these sounds were created. While other fans were air guitaring to Jimmy Page's solos, Scholz was analyzing the frequency responses and signal chains that created those legendary tones. His approach to creating music was unprecedented. While record companies were spending millions on state-of-the-art studios, Scholz was creating better sounds with homemade gear in a space barely bigger than a storage closet. His background at MIT wasn't just a footnote. It was the secret weapon that would change rock music forever. He approached each sonic challenge like an engineering problem to be solved. The basement itself became a laboratory of innovation. Scholz designed and built his own effects processors. When commercial units couldn't deliver the sounds he heard in his head, he modified amplifiers, created custom signal routing systems, and developed recording techniques that were years ahead of their time. His most significant innovation was a power soak device that allowed him to get maximum overdrive sounds at neighbor-friendly volumes, technology that wouldn't be commercially available for years. The sound he was chasing seemed impossible at the time, the raw energy of Led Zeppelin, the technical precision of Jeff Beck, but with a sonic quality that had never been heard before. Most home recordings in the 1970s sounded exactly like what they were, amateur tapes made in someone's spare room. But what Scholz was creating in his basement was different. It was massive. It was pristine. It was the future of rock music being born in suburban Massachusetts. His double life wasn't easy to maintain. He'd show up late to Polaroid, often exhausted from all-night recording sessions. His colleagues probably thought he was losing his mind. Engineers aren't supposed to dream of rock stardom. They're supposed to crave stability, predictability, pension plans. But Scholz was rewiring more than just his equipment. He was rewiring the entire concept of what one person could achieve in music. The recording process itself was a testament to his perfectionism. Each guitar part was meticulously planned and executed. He would spend weeks getting a single guitar tone right, treating each sound like a scientific experiment. Variables were isolated, tested, and refined. The results were documented with an engineer's precision. This wasn't just recording, it was sonic research and development. When the demo tapes finally reached CBS Records, the executives were stunned. These couldn't be basement recordings. The sound was too huge, too perfect. They were convinced it had to be a full band in a professional studio. When they learned it was largely the work of one engineer in a basement, they didn't believe it. The industry experts said it was impossible. Their solution? Re-record everything in a proper studio with professional equipment. But Scholz stood his ground. He knew something the record executives didn't. His basement studio wasn't just a makeshift recording space. It was a carefully crafted environment where every piece of equipment, every acoustic treatment, every technical innovation had been perfectly tailored to create his vision. He wouldn't re-record in their studios. It had to be his way, with his equipment, in his basement. The addition of Brad Delp's soaring vocals was the final piece of the puzzle. Delp's voice was a perfect match for Scholz's meticulously crafted soundscapes. His multi-tracked harmonies added a human warmth to the technical precision of the instrumentation. The process of recording vocals was just as meticulous as everything else in Scholz's world. He would spend countless hours with Delp, layering harmony upon harmony, creating the massive vocal sound that would become another Boston trademark. Some songs featured as many as 12 separate vocal tracks, all precisely arranged to create that signature sound. Scholz's attention to detail bordered on obsessiveness. He would spend months perfecting guitar overdubs, sometimes recording the same part hundreds of times until it matched the sound he heard in his head. This wasn't just perfectionism, it was a complete reinvention of how rock music could be recorded. His innovative use of tape flanging, created by manually manipulating the speed of one tape machine against another, produced effects that had never been heard before. These techniques would later become standard practices in the industry, but at the time, they were revolutionary. The guitar sound itself was a marvel of engineering. Scholz had developed a complex signal chain that included modified amplifiers, custom-built preamps, and precisely calibrated effects. He would often record at extremely low volumes, using his power soak device to achieve the sound of a cranked amplifier, while keeping the actual volume at a level that wouldn't disturb his neighbors. This technique alone was years ahead of its time, and would later become standard practice in modern recording. When Boston's debut album finally dropped in 1976, it didn't just make waves, it created a tsunami in the music industry. More Than a Feeling burst through speakers across America, and listeners couldn't believe what they were hearing. The sound was unlike anything else on the radio, massive yet pristine, powerful yet perfectly controlled. It was stadium rock, born in a basement, and it would sell over 17 million copies, becoming one of the best-selling debut albums of all time. The album's track listing read like a greatest hits compilation: Peace of Mind, Foreplay, Long Time, Rock and Roll Band. Each song was crafted with the same attention to detail, the same revolutionary approach to sound. Even the album's quieter moments, like Let Me Take You Home Tonight, showcased Scholz's innovative production techniques. Every track was a masterclass in sonic architecture, built from the ground up with an engineer's precision and a musician's soul. The impact on the industry was immediate and lasting. Engineers and producers would spend years trying to recreate the Boston sound. But what they didn't understand was that it wasn't just about the equipment or the techniques, it was about the mindset. Scholz had approached each song as both an artistic and technical challenge, using his engineering background to solve problems that had plagued recording artists for years. His innovations weren't limited to recording techniques. The guitar tones he achieved became the holy grail for countless musicians and producers. The Boston sound, characterized by its thick, harmonically rich guitars and crystal-clear production, would influence rock music for decades to come. Bands from Van Halen to Def Leppard would draw inspiration from his production techniques, and his approach to home recording would pave the way for countless independent artists. But success didn't change Scholz's approach. Even after selling millions of records, he continued to work from his basement studio, constantly innovating and refining his sound. He started his own company, Scholz Research and Development, to manufacture the equipment he'd invented. The Rockman headphone amp, released in 1982, became a favorite tool of countless guitarists, including Def Leppard's Phil Collen, who used it extensively on their multi-platinum album Hysteria. The company's success further validated Scholz's technical approach to music. His innovations weren't just creative choices, they were practical solutions to real problems that musicians faced. The Rockman series of products made it possible for guitarists to achieve professional quality sounds in their own homes, democratizing the kind of tone that had previously only been available in professional studios. Critics often questioned the time between Boston albums. The follow-up, Don't Look Back, wasn't released until 1978, and subsequent albums took even longer. But this, too, was a reflection of Scholz's commitment to his vision. He refused to rush the creative process, believing that perfection couldn't be achieved on a corporate timeline. This stance would lead to legal battles with his record company, but Scholz stood firm, protecting his artistic integrity at all costs. This isn't just the story of a hit album or a successful band. It's about how one engineer's obsession with perfection changed the game. While the music industry was stuck in its ways, a quiet genius in a Massachusetts basement was inventing the future of rock. The tools and techniques Scholz developed would influence generations of musicians and producers, from the biggest names in rock to countless bedroom producers making music on their laptops. Today, When we talk about home recording and independent music production, we're standing on the shoulders of that MIT graduate who dared to dream bigger. The basement studio revolution that would explode in later decades. It started with a Polaroid engineer who believed that with enough technical knowledge, determination, and vision, one person could capture the sound of an entire arena in a basement. The modern music landscape, with its emphasis on home recording and independent production, owes a tremendous debt to Scholz's innovations. Every time an artist records an album in their bedroom, every time a guitarist plugs directly into their computer to achieve stadium-sized sounds, they're building on the foundation that Scholz laid in that Massachusetts basement. That's the real legacy of Boston's debut album. It wasn't just about the platinum records or sold-out concerts. It wasn't even about the revolutionary sound or the technical innovations. It was proof that sometimes the biggest sounds come from the smallest spaces, and the most revolutionary ideas come from those who dare to break all the rules. Tom Scholz didn't just make an album, he showed us that with enough passion, innovation, and dedication to one's vision, you can change the world from your basement. In doing so, he didn't just create timeless music, he rewrote the rules of how that music could be made, inspiring generations of musicians to follow their own unique path, regardless of industry conventions or expectations. The story of Boston and Tom Scholz reminds us that true innovation often comes from unlikely places. Sometimes it takes an outsider, someone who doesn't know or care about the way things are done, to show us what's possible. In an industry that often values speed over quality and commerce over art, Scholz showed that there was another way. His legacy lives on not just in the timeless music of Boston, but in every artist who dares to follow their vision, no matter how long it takes or how unconventional their approach might be.